How does a handful of autocrats gain total control over a population of 1.4 billion?
I have 2 master degrees, one in clinical psychology, one in statistics. And at the beginning of the crisis, I started to study the statistics a little bit. It was the moment when I started to think how it was possible that an entire society and an entire population was in the grip of a narrative which in many respects was blatantly wrong. After a few months it became clear to me that the only mechanism that could explain what was happening in society was what is usually referred to as mass formation. Mass formation is identical to hypnosis, and this term refers to a specific kind of group formation which has very special characteristic effects at the level of individual mental functioning. And one of these effects is that an individual that is in the grip of mass formation typically lose every capacity to take a critical distance from what they believe in, from what the group believes in.
You would think it would be people with lower IQs that would be more susceptible to this, but it seems to be the other way around. Are you seeing this?
I have seen this, and it does seem to be predicted by educational status and IQ. Who are highly intelligent tend to go and get a lot of degrees. Those people have spent so many years in institutions to get those degrees that they have developed a trust and confidence in not only the educational institutions, but those that support them, which are largely government bodies. And so they start from the place of, if it's told by the university, by the government, it's probably going to be true.
What I've learned about science is that it's really, imagine they're looking at like a fragment of the world, and it's all they see. It's all they're looking at. The world, they don't see the world.
So I think that there's a disconnect between people who are smart and have lots of degrees with actual reality, with the lived experience of nature, of life, that you don't see with people who are actually working with their hands outdoors all of the time.
A mass formation typically emerges in a society when very specific conditions are met. First and for all, the most central condition is a major part of the population needs to feel lonely.
The real pandemic here is the psychological warfare that's being waged on every single human being. See, if you take a human being and you put them in a chronic fear state, and you couple that with human isolation, what happens is they psychologically decompensate and live in such emotional pain that they will gravitate in an irrational way to anything that you promise them will alleviate that pain.
Once people feel disconnected from their environment, they will typically start to experience a lack of meaning-making in life. And under these conditions, if a narrative is distributed through the mass media, indicating an object of anxiety and a strategy to deal with this object of anxiety, they suddenly, connect to one small object of fear, for instance the coronavirus, and afterwards, people don't feel lonely anymore. They feel connected again. The new kind of social bond is highly problematic, just because the connections between the individuals even deteriorate more, and the bond between the individual and the collective becomes stronger and stronger and stronger, which make them willing to sacrifice everything for the collective. Its health, its wealth, the future of its children, everything. Something else that is a really characteristic of individuals in mass formation is that they become radically intolerant for dissonant voices. People who do not go along with the masses are stigmatized, and in the end, the masses are inclined to destroy the people who do not go along with them, and they do so as if it is an ethical duty to do so.
Getting good people to do bad things, harmful things, while thinking they're good things, it's a dangerous place to be because it looks great. You feel great while you're being used.
They will sacrifice themselves, and they see it as a virtue because it demonstrates their complete obedience to the cult, to the group, to perform ritualistic behavior which causes them harm.
One of the most clear illustrations of this was when the leaders of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union were sentenced to death, often tortured to death. They did not object. They said things like, if this helps the Communist Party, it's my pleasure to do it. That's something that was observed in all major examples of mass formation in history.
Walk me through, if you would, what happens scientifically inside our minds when we're in a state of fear, and then how that affects our external choices and the direction of our lives.
This is well known and well researched in the psychological literature and the psychiatric literature, that when someone is afraid, when someone is in a state of fear, that person cannot think rationally. You resort back to a more primitive way of making decisions, which is highly emotionally driven. And when you're placed in a chronic state of fear, as we have been, you end up in a, what I would call a traumatized state, meaning that you're not just momentarily scared, you are frozen. You have seen your ability to think critically suspended.
The more we can distract people by creating the illusion that says everything is fearful, the more we can manipulate the population.
We were groomed for decades to be fearful, whether it was drop and cover.
We must be ready all the time if the atomic bomb explodes. Duck and cover.
To protect against the threat of nuclear annihilation, or more recently, the impending ecological collapse of our planet in 12 years that AOC and Greta Thunberg keep warning us about.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. How dare you?
All of these fears are grounded to some degree in reality. They're not completely invented, but they are exaggerated so greatly that we cannot actually reason through them anymore.
When people are afraid, they won't just accept authoritarianism, they'll demand it. They will demand it. Somebody do something. Somebody take charge and tell me what to do. Like, where do I stand? Where do I walk? What do we do? What are the rules? And again, people in power always use that, right? Where they say, never let a good crisis go to waste. We can take this and we can now enact policies that normally we wouldn't be able to get away with.
Maybe in a couple of decades, when people look back, the thing they will remember from the COVID crisis, this was the moment that we agreed to be surveyed all the time.
And maybe even after the event is over, maybe we can still keep 30%. And over time, multiple crises, suddenly you have a government or an individual who has far more power than they're actually supposed to.
The leaders of the mass, the people who pronounce a narrative in public space, usually are hypnotized themselves. They believe they need to reshape society to be able to deal with the challenges society faces, and they believe so fanatically in that ideology that they think it's justified to manipulate and cheat and to use all kinds of narratives to convince people to go along with that ideology.
No. Rise up in a non-violent way. They can't imprison everyone. They can't fire everyone. But they can fire individuals that are separated and don't work together and give in to the fear. And don't sacrifice your future for a few conveniences now in the present. You should sacrifice maybe the present conveniences so that you're going to have a future.
The media has done a good job at stripping from us our ability to think on our own and for ourselves. If we can get back to that, I think that we can build a stronger America.
The first step you have to take is you have to get out from under the control mechanisms. And that means blow up your TV, don't listen to the fear porn, and set yourself free of debt, which is what controls you and controls everything around you. It is the weapon that is used.
The most important thing is always that the dissonant voices continue to speak out, and also extremely important, that they don't start to form a mass or a crowd themselves, because that happens very easily as well. Happens very easily. Once a large-scale mass formation starts, the people who do not go along with them feel threatened, and they can start to form a mass themselves. So it's extremely important not to form a mass ourselves. That means to form a group, a coherent group, and that what unifies this group should in the first place be the fact that everybody who belongs to the group can have his own opinion and can speak in his own way. It's a bit cynical, but it is in the end good news that mass formation and totalitarianism always destroys itself in a relatively short time span. And the most important thing, of course, is that you have to make sure that the system does not destroy you before it destroys itself.